This week, I'm trimming a bowl you may have seen me throw in a video I posted 2 weeks ago. I'll leave a link to that video on the screen now and in the description below. First though, I'll unpack my turning tools. These consist of a number of trimmers, some metal kidneys, and my maker's mark, which I'll finally stamp the pot with. I began by centering the bowl, pinning it down in place with 3 lumps of soft clay, and then turning the rim. I want this edge to be quite sturdy, but with 2 very sharp points on either side, which should hopefully encourage my glazes to break quite dramatically over them. And for a job like this, I tend to use one of my older, slightly blunted turning tools, as they leave a sort of burnished, very smooth finish, as compared to my sharper tungsten carbide tools you'll see me using in a moment, which, as this clay contains some grog, leave a more torn and rough surface in most situations. Once trimmed, I go over these edges with my fingertips, just to round them off a tiny bit, so they aren't razor sharp. That's the top and the inside turned, although I may need to revisit the rim after I've trimmed the underside of the bowl, just to make sure it's very pristine and smooth. Which is exactly why I clean the wheel head at this point, as I'd hate for any bits of clay to stick themselves back into the portion of the pot I just so carefully finished. The bowl is then gently lowered down and then tap centered to spin centrally. Now, with this pot, I wanted to trim the portion near the rim, so before I secured it down with pieces of soft clay, I first placed my spinner tool on top and pushed down through it firmly to pin the bowl in place as I turned the rim section of the bowl to thin out that portion of the bowl and to get the form closer to what I had in mind, which was for the walls to be almost vertical as they approached the rim. And you can see that I'm squashing a portion of that rim against the metal wheel head, which isn't ideal, and I'll need to clean that up before moving any further. To make lifting this bowl away just a little more easy, I'll quickly trim a groove into the base like so. This gives my fingers something to latch onto so that I can pick the pot up and quickly fix the rim. So once again, it's quickly tap centered and the overhanging burr of clay is removed. Arguably this could have been done at the very end, after the foot ring itself had been turned, but at this point the foot ring is very undefined, so it doesn't matter if I tap center it quickly and roughly. As I haven't turned the delicate foot ring yet, there's nothing there that can be ruined. Now the bowl can be placed back down. I then move it roughly into the middle before tap centering it gently the very last of the way. I then take 3 lumps of soft clay and squash them around the rim of the bowl, pushing them down against the metal rather than pushing them directly against the bowl itself, as doing so can cause the bowl to move off center, and if the walls of the vessel are particularly thin, you can even indent them. Once locked in place, I also use my spinner, once again, to hold the pot down as I trim away at it quite aggressively. And apologies for my overexposed hands in these clips. It's that time of the year where, for an hour each day, the sun shines directly onto my wheel head. Usually I love this moment, but when it comes to filming, it isn't ideal. As I turn, I grip the tool right by the blade, which I clasp extraordinarily tightly so that the blade passes through any slight undulations there might be in the walls of the bowl. And typically I start near the bottom and then slowly move the blade up the wall towards the foot. As soon as I'm able to connect my left and right hand via the thumb of my left hand, I do so, as this simple connection adds so much stability to my movements. Otherwise my aim here is twofold. I'm removing excess weight from the walls of the bowl, and I'm also refining the overall form. I don't want this pot to feel bottom heavy, but I did too, of course, throw it with excess material in the base, but I did that because I wanted to trim a nice tall foot ring on this bowl, and a vast majority of that is still in the lump of clay you see at the top, which soon I'll hollow out. There were a few faint chattering marks left on the surface of the bowl, so once trimmed I just used a flexible metal kidney which I hold firmly over the surface to remove the worst of it. Now to turn the outside of the foot ring itself, which I'll trim to have 2 distinct facets that come to a raised point in the middle. The plane closest to the foot ring will remain unglazed, which means it'll be waxed and dipped in glaze, and that portion will remain as bare clay, whereas the other facet, the one that meets the curve of the bowl, will not only be glazed, but it also acts as a glaze catch, as during the firing, when all the glaze is soft and molten, some of it will flow down the form and gather in this groove. If instead I made the same shape, but with a foot ring that was totally flat, there's quite a good chance that the glaze will cascade down it and onto the kiln shelf, fusing the piece firmly in place and most likely destroying it. Once I've trimmed the foot to my liking, and before I begin hollowing out the inside of it, I make sure the connection between the curve of the bowl and the foot is nice and crisp and well defined. I then turn the base of the bowl flat, removing the wiring off marks that are left, which at this point you can see is a sort of linear texture, and once the bottom of the bowl is nice and flat, I can begin to gouge clay out from inside the foot. This is something I do bit by bit, instead of trying to remove too much at once, as inevitably that leads to something going wrong. Not only am I pushing in with the blade, but those extended fingers of my left hand are also pushing firmly down against it, replicating exactly what I was doing with the spinner earlier on. Visually, at this point, my aim here is to lower the clay to the same level as the curved wall below, and visually it helps, as I know I don't need to be too cautious yet, as there's still quite a lot of clay to remove. And really, the greatest danger at this point is to trim away too much horizontally and maybe destroying one side of the foot ring itself. The other fear, of course, is trimming through the bottom, and as I turn ever lower, I'm constantly aware about how the floor of clay feels beneath the tool, and if I feel it begin to bow inward ever so slightly, which I can check by pressing it in like so, then I know it's time to stop removing any more material. The only problem turning such deep foot rings is constantly having to remove sticky coils of clay from inside it, and I'd say at this point the clay on this bowl was just a bit too soft to be trimming. And that's why, after the internal form has been neatened up, and I've also stamped the pot with my maker's mark, I quickly blasted the foot ring with my heat gun, just so I'd be able to pick the pot off the wheel by the foot without potentially deforming it or having my fingers sink into the soft clay. With that, the pot's lifted away, and before I can call it finished, I will just double check the rim, just to make sure it's sharp and crisp all the way around. Although in this case, the only discrepancy I found was actually in the interior of the bowl, which I quickly corrected with a metal kidney, and from this point onwards, I'll leave this pot out so that it can slowly turn bone dry, and only then will all of these pots be loaded into my electric kiln for a bisque firing to 1000 degrees Celsius. After that's been done, I can glaze them, clean them up, and then prepare them for the gas firing, which goes to the much hotter temperature of 1290 degrees Celsius. But I'm yet to do any of that, and so for now I'll enjoy them in this pale pink state. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you don't mind these shorter videos. I'm currently working on another ongoing project, which is really limiting the amount of time I can spend in the studio. I hate to keep it a secret, but it'll be worth it. Trust me, and I'll see you, hopefully, next week.